Once upon a time, there was a king who called one of his servants. And the same servant was known to be a cruel, mean man who had no friends. And the king said to him, "I want you to go and travel the length and the breadth of my kingdom and find for me a truly good person." So the man went, and in the course of his travels, he met and spoke with a great number of people. However, after a long time, he came back to the king and he said, "I have searched the whole kingdom as you asked me, but I couldn't find even one truly good person. All of them, without exception, are mean, cruel, deceitful, and evil. The good person you seek is nowhere to be found." Then the king called another servant. This man was known for his generosity and kindness, and he was loved by everyone. And the king said to him, "Go and travel the length and breadth of my kingdom and find me a truly wicked person." So the man went and traveled far and wide. But after a long time, he returned to the king, saying, "I have failed in the task that you gave me to do. I found people who are misguided, people who are misled, people who act in blindness or in passion, but nowhere could I find a truly evil person. All of them are good at heart, despite the things that they have done." Now, some might interpret the moral of this story as that we judge people according to how we are. If we are good, we see all people as good. If we are cruel, we see all people as cruel. Certainly one way of interpreting it. But I would like to interpret it in another way. And I would like to see both of these individuals not as two individuals, but as the same person. And the point being that we are all saint and sinner. We all have our virtues, but as Carl Jung has pointed out, each one of us has our shadow side. And we must be aware of and deal with both if we're going to respond to Isaiah's call in that first reading to be a real light in the world and not to bring darkness to the world. And also if we are to live out that responsorial psalm that was just sung, "Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will, not mine." And in the gospel we see the great figure of John the Baptist, certainly a man who knew himself. He knew his virtues, he knew his vices, he knew his shadow, and he didn't allow his shadow part to get in the way of his ability to do good works. He understood his sinfulness. And isn't that the reason that when we come here each Sunday, that the very first thing we do in Eucharist is we enter into that rite of penance? We gather together aware that we are all saint and sinner, needing to be forgiven and needing to forgive one another. There was a very interesting article a few weeks ago in the Los Angeles Times about Nelson Mandela. And it was about his awareness that although so many people were trying to make him a saint, he knew that he wasn't. But he accepted it from people only because it was, of course, politically helpful to his cause. But he was adamant that he was simply an ordinary man who rose above his sinfulness, his ordinariness. And the article talks about that he was an irritable man who got cross when he couldn't have his favorite brand of mineral water, that he was a fusser who obsessively folded his daily newspaper just so, and he got annoyed if things weren't lined up in precise order. He was an aloof man who nonetheless flirted with any pretty young woman that he met. And he consistently and he always insisted that he wasn't that mystical figure that people tried to make of him. He consistently told us that he was an ordinary man who went beyond his ordinary self to do good things and to be a light to the world. It's interesting, too, that there's a movie out, of course, on Mandela these days, and last week at the Golden Globes, the theme song won the Golden Globe. Interestingly enough, the title of the song, and you might be familiar with it, written by Bono, is Ordinary Love. And the lyrics are wonderful. I encourage you to look it up. The lyrics go something like, "We cannot reach higher if we cannot deal with ordinary love." And it's all about the fact that with ordinary love, so much light can come into the world and replace the darkness. And this is the challenge of Isaiah this weekend, to be a light and not to be a darkness. But to do this, each one of us must be aware that we are all works in progress. And we have to work at it every single day. That every single day we have to get beyond our egos, that we have to accept our humanity and our sinfulness and each other's humanity and sinfulness, that we have to be aware of our shadow side, that we have to constantly rely on God's graces to make good choices and not bad choices, to bring light and not darkness. It's also interesting that in the past few years, 120 million people, can you imagine that? 120 million people in 220 countries have been mesmerized by a television show that's on now every single Sunday night for a few weeks. Fascinated by Julian Fellowes' masterpiece classic, Downton Abbey. If you are as intrigued by it as so many are, you know that the characters in Downton Abbey are spellbinding. Both the aristocrats upstairs and the servants downstairs. And they're mesmerizing because they're all good and bad. They're all selfish and generous. They're all tradition-bound and rebellious individuals. You see, the series Downton Abbey is all about relationships. And it points out to all of us that we are simply fellow travelers seeking wisdom and insight. There's such a variety of characters in these stories that all of the irrational and disturbing aspects of human behavior and all of our hidden shadow sides are on view every Sunday night. The great biographer James Boswell talks about how he writes biographies and how he sees life. He says, in every picture, there should be shade as well as light. And the critics then for Downton Abbey agree with this, and they point out that Downton Abbey honors this assessment of human nature. It brings into our lives and our hearts credible, flawed, and endearing people who teach us many things. They teach us that life is not a problem to be solved, but it's a great spiritual adventure. And that's what the scriptures teach us constantly. Life is not a problem to be solved, but it's a spiritual adventure to be entered in and experienced to the fullest every single day. And it's filled with people who have wonderful virtues, as well as often being misguided and misled, acting in blindness or in passion. But even as flawed as we all might be, each one of us is called in our own ordinary way, with our own ordinary love, to do good things, to bring light into the world, and to get rid of some of the darkness, and to struggle to do God's will and not our own. If you are familiar with Downton Abbey, you're also familiar with that haunting theme music that opens the show and actually goes through it the whole time. It's as moving as the theme music from Mandela's movie. And it keeps us on edge. It keeps us excited as to what's going to happen in this show tonight. As we listen to it, we're always asking ourselves, where's the drama of this family headed? Now, the great legendary lyricist Don Black just gave lyrics to that theme song a couple of years ago. And it's very interesting, the title that he gave it, and the lyrics are wonderful. I encourage you to go to the internet and look at them. But the title of the music is, "Did I Make the Most of Loving You?" And the lyrics ask that question: did we make the most of life, of all that we had? And then it tells us, it challenges us, if we didn't, we still have time to change our ways. So perhaps as we struggle this weekend to try to understand these scriptures, maybe these two theme songs help us understand what the challenge for us is. That Bono's lyrics ask us, are we tough enough for ordinary love? And Don Black's lyrics ask, did we make the most of life? And confronts us, we still have time to change our ways, to be light, to make peace with our shadow sides, to do good things, to make good choices, bring more light into the world. So, I think the scriptures remind us this weekend, the truly good person and the truly misguided person are found in each one of us. We have our virtues, we have our shadow sides, just like Nelson Mandela, just like the characters of Downton. But we're called to remember that life is a spiritual adventure. We're all on this adventure together, as good and bad, as selfish and generous, as tradition-bound and rebellious individuals. We're all travelers, seeking and searching to do God's will and to be light to those around us. So let each one of us ask ourselves these questions. Are we tough enough for just ordinary love? And if we haven't made the most of life yet, we still have time to change. And that's what we do at the beginning of every Mass. We enter into the penance rite. We know that we need to be forgiven. And our God gives us this wonderful opportunity to start again, to do God's will, and to be light for all those around us.